It's time to make sports talk great again with Curt Schilling and Steve Deace.
And greetings. Happy Monday. Welcome to The Blaze. I am Steve Deace. He is World Series champion, future Hall of Famer Curt Schilling. Here's how it works. Each weekday, we put 25 minutes on the clock, perfect amount of time. Why do we go 25? Well, because the analysts tell us that's about as long as anybody listens to a podcast these days, because it lines up with your average commute, with your average cardio. So we get to as many of the day's sports topics in 25 minutes as we possibly can. Curt, are you ready to go?
Ready to go.
So we begin now. Let's begin with a remembrance. Since you and I last met for this show, one of the game's all-time greats, maybe the most underrated all-timer of all time, Frank Robinson, passing away at the age of 83. This is just a quick summation of his biography. A rare Triple Crown winner. He is still the only player ever to win the MVP in both leagues. 14-time All-Star, World Series MVP. Hit 300 or better 9 times. 30 home runs or more 11 times. He is still top 10 all-time in home runs, slugging percentage, total bases, and runs scored, as well as games played. He was also the first black manager in Major League Baseball history. He was the American League Manager of the Year in 1989, which I know is something you know a little bit about. He was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1982, his first year of eligibility. You're talking about a guy that is one of the great players, one of the great contributors in the history of the grand old game, and somebody that I know you have a history with.
I do. Not just he, but him and his family have been and still remain very dear friends of ours. I have so many Frank Robinson stories that we could fill the show with them. But one of the things that I heard people talk about, and you just said it, and I never thought about it because I always thought about him as one of the greatest, but he is probably the most underrated legend of all times. He's one of the 10 best players of all time, yet I don't think you ever hear, they talk Mantle, Mays, DiMaggio, Ruth, Gehrig. Robinson is right there, and not Jackie, Frank. You remember he came up at a very challenging time as well. I mean, his career started after Jackie was in the big leagues, but there was still a lot of racial tension for black players in baseball when Frank played. He was old school. He and I were close. 89, I was on that team for a little bit. 90, I was on the team for a lot more. But one of my favorites. So Frank was very old school. Everything about him was old school. And
now, the audience needs to understand, this is old school by Curt get off my lawn Schilling standards. Okay. I mean, Curt Schilling, if Frank Robinson's old school, then he is Schilling's a progressive by comparison. So finish your anecdote. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I've got a million of them, but one of my favorite was when I first got to the big leagues. So Frank was a little bit older, and Frank was one of those guys as a Hall of Famer that it was a challenge for him to manage because Frank just couldn't understand why you couldn't do what he asked you to do. Mm-hmm. Right? Runner on third, less than 2 outs. Just hit a ground ball to the right side. How hard is that? Right? Like, and it was funny because he said it so matter of fact. Like, I just need you to hit a ground ball to the right side. Is it really that hard? Do I have to? I mean, is it? And there were a lot of things like that. But he used to be on the bench. And my first week in the big leagues, I noticed that the guys in the bullpen used to take this is in old Memorial Stadium. Guys in the bullpen used to take binoculars. And they would be looking at the bench. And I found out a couple days in that they had a pool every night. And the pool was what inning they would catch Frank sleeping during the game. He would fall asleep every single night. They would catch him with the head down every now and then. And which, yes, it was funny. And no one ever was the wiser. But Frank was a guy on the bench that he wasn't very talkative. So when Frank in the American League, you don't make a lot of moves in the American League. You're not, except for pitching changes, you don't really do a lot. You don't pinch hit a lot, yada, yada, yada. So you fast forward to 1989, Mickey Tettleton's having the year of his life. And we had Phil Bradley and Cal Ripken.
The guy that ate Fruit Loops before every game, right?
Yes.
Because that was the story when he went to my Tigers and was the second slugger next to Cecil Fielder on those teams in the early 90s, yes.
Yep. And so when Frank would make a move on the bench, he would point down the bench, and there were, 10 guys, 15 guys on the bench, he would point. And the guys on the bench would have to play like, who me? You ever see Night at the Roxbury?
Yeah.
Will Ferrell, and when they're going, who, me?
And Chris Kattan, right, yeah.
Yes. This is exactly what guys on the bench would be doing. They'd be like, wait, me? No, me. No one ever knew what he wanted. And then when the right player would step out, he'd go, and he'd point. And everybody had to interpret him. So Mickey Tettleton's having the year of his life. There's runners on second and third. Mickey's on deck. And Frank's pointing down to the bench, and everybody's trying to figure it out. And Phil Bradley had just come off the DL that day. So Phil leans out and points to himself, and Frank says, yeah, and points out. And Frank sits back and does one of these. And Phil Bradley announces himself as the pinch hitter for Mickey Tettleton.
Oh, boy.
With the bases loaded. And as soon as he announces it, Frank looks up like, what is going on? And he's livid. First pitch, Phil Bradley hits a grand slam.
No way.
After the game, Frank's talking to the media, and they're like, what? He said, well, I really wanted to get Phil into a situation that would push him a little bit. We're going to need him for the stretch. And we all knew the truth. And it was just, and that was Frank. Frank was he was such a good man. He was and we've talked about this in the past. He passed away about 8 months after my father died. And I was in dire need of strong male role models, and he was very much that. Mm-hmm. And he's also the only man to ever stare at me for 5 minutes and not speak.
That's unnerving, isn't it?
It was horrifying.
It's one of the most. You know what? I've got a signed baseball here from Bob Feller.
Yeah.
He did that to me a couple times, and I wanted to pee myself. Yes.
So I grew up in baseball. I knew who Frank Robinson was. I mean, I knew all about these guys. When I got called up in 1989, I had a unique haircut, so to speak. I had a little stripe shaved in the side. I had an earring in. I was cool. Frank called me in his office, and he sat like this, just like this. And he stared at me for 5 minutes. About every minute and a half, he'd go like this. He looks at me and he goes, the hair and the earring will be fixed before you throw a baseball for me. Yes, sir. I got up, walked out of his office, went in the bathroom, shaved my head, took the earring out. And he looked at me about 20 minutes later and he goes, all right, now we're ready.
Nice.
And that was it. And he was such a good man. And all throughout my career, he was a part of my life. He was very close with his family, Barbara Ann and his daughter, and very incredible people. And he was always funny. I had a car. When I was young, I bought a Corvette, and I had a system in my Corvette where I could call the phone in it. And when he found out about it, he in the front of the whole team, he's like, "What do you mean you can call your car? Why would you want to call your car if you're not in it? Are you going to call your car when somebody steals it and say, hey, that's my car, bring it back? What the hell are you thinking?" And so, yeah, that was Frank. And again, baseball lost a legend and probably one of its 10 greatest players of all time.
Mm-hmm. When you stack up that stat line, I think, what was he, about 20, 30 hits short of 3,000 too? Yeah. I mean, that's really exclusive company. When you start talking 500 home runs and 3,000 hits, he almost hit 600 home runs and 3,000 hits. I mean, he was really close on both ends of that.
When you didn't hit 600 home runs.
Right.
And we're talking about a game that's over a century old. And I always try and put it in this perspective. Tens of thousands of players have played, and he's the only one to have done something. Mm-hmm. Anytime you're the only one to have done something in a game like baseball and with the age that it has, you're talking about just unprecedented. The only guy to win an MVP in both leagues. And that is amazing.
Let's go and segue to a far less thoughtful individual. Now, I will say this. In the past, I have defended Stephen A. Smith, and here's why. I grow tired of how everybody in my line of work always thinks they have to have the same opinion about everything. All right. I like I like people who speak their mind, even when I don't agree. I just like people who speak their mind. I like hearing a contrarian take. I don't like when, and this happens in our industry, the pack mentality, the narratives go out and everybody's got to sing off the same sheet. And everybody's the gatekeeper of the Overton window. And I like the guy that has a unique take on things. And he's been known to do that over the course of his career. Okay.
Let me just add this, though. He is one of the guys that I point to people as an example of not everyone is as smart as you think they are because they do what they do.
Right.
I mean, this comment you're getting ready to talk about,
yep.
I'm not going to, is the perfect comment to denote that a lot of people aren't really as smart as they present themselves to be.
No.
And and I always tell people in sports and sports radio, there's millions, tens of millions of people that could do the job probably more informed and better than you.
Well,
and this is and I say that
when we started this show, I don't think I even told you this at the time. When we started this show, All-Star Break last summer, and the first week of shows go by, and I went to a couple of the people that helped set the show up from a production standpoint and said, "Hey, give me some feedback. What do you think?"
Right.
And their big issue was you and I didn't argue enough.
Right.
And I'm like, guys, he has 3,000 strikeouts, maybe pitched the most famous game other than Don Larson in the history of the World Series. Okay. We're in the heart of baseball season. What the hell do I know about this that he doesn't know? Why would I argue with an expert? Why would I presume to go to the Smithsonian and argue geology with them? Why would I do that?
Our disagreements are real.
Yeah, so I said, wait till we get into football season. We're more in the wheelhouse of where maybe I think I might know a little bit more than him, and you'll see more disagreement. But I'm not going to contrive an argument with someone. It's the old Abe Lincoln line. Better to be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth up and confirm it for everybody.
I took the approach that you did with baseball with you in football.
Right.
I'm okay not being right, and I'm okay not being the smartest guy in the room. I just want to get smarter, and a lot of times you get a whole lot smarter listening rather than talking.
Well, here's the thing with Stephen A. And the whole Screamin' A act. And I thought the show that him and Skip Bayless did for years, it used to be on during my workout time back when they were together. I loved the show.
Hated it.
You hated it? I loved it. You know why I loved it? Because they both gave outrageous opinions that often canceled each other out. So it was almost like watching one con man confront another. In a way, it was almost like watching Phil Ivey and Phil Hellmuth play poker together, and they're both holding deuce 7. All right,
right.
Okay,
but
that's what I enjoyed about it.
Ivy and Hellmuth were wicked talented. I didn't think either one of these guys was. And the day that Skip Bayless said that if you gave him 100 pitches, he could put a ball in playoff Randy Johnson, I was all done.
Well, now he is. They start talking the NFL draft and get to Dwayne Haskins, right? And there's the age-old racial stereotype. And I love that Dan Patrick goes into our racial stereotypes in sports and mocks these all the time. The white guy's always gritty and gutty, as if the black players are just, all soft. Right. And the white guys are smart, as if the black players are all like dumb. And the black players are all athletic, as if no white guys are fast. See Christian McCaffrey, for example, okay? And so he gets in, he's doing his analysis on Dwayne Haskins as the first quarterback picked in the draft this April. And he says, well, I see him as more of a runner. This guy is the first quarterback in Big Ten history. It's the oldest conference in America to throw 50 touchdowns. Drew Brees didn't even do this in the Big Ten, what he did last year. The big complaint against Dwayne Haskins all year was that he was not a runner. I can promise you, when he goes to the combine in a few weeks, when we look at his athletic stats and stack them up against the old bearded white guy and Andrew Luck, he's not even close to the athlete that Andrew Luck is, okay? And so Stephen A gets called out for this. Even the official Ohio State Twitter feed dropped a "come on, man" on him. Okay, great troll, by the way. Hey, hate the game. This is from one. This Wolverine will testify that was a great troll by the Scarlet and Gray. Instead of recognize, I listened to a sports show this morning that two of ESPN's college football analysts, Dusty Dvorak and Greg McElroy, were on. They totally threw Stephen A under the bus, by the way. So with all these people calling him out, he refuses to admit, you know what, man, I just kind of blew that take. He doubles down, hey, a film I watched, that's just my analysis, as opposed to just owning it that he made a boo-boo. Forget the whole double standard on the racial thing. Clay Travis has already done that whole take. I'm interested in a broader conversation here about sports media that's going to have more of an impact, I think, on our audience, and that is this. Do guys like Stephen A. Smith, are they being put on the air so often they couldn't possibly have the time to analyze and break down the sports they're being asked to talk about? So we're almost putting them in a position to fail because they're really good at screaming out stuff rather than actually analyzing stuff. As a guy that's been paid to analyze, what do you think?
No, you don't have to be. Here's the thing. You have to. What have I always told you? One of my signature hallmarks for someone that's great at what they do. What's one of the characteristics they all have?
Self-awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to know, like, and I don't think that you and I think you and I were perfect answers. That we came in here both very aware of what our strengths and weaknesses were, and I got smarter and better at a lot of things I'm very weak at just by listening to you. And I would like to think vice versa. No different here. You don't have to have. You didn't have to take an NFL scout's approach and watch all of game tape of Dwayne Haskins. You know what you do? You have what I do. When I don't know something, I have 4 or 5 go-tos.
Right.
People that I trust that knows things.
That's a good point.
All you had to do was look at the scouting reports and get an idea of what his grades are and look at some of the NFL grading on his throwing. And I'm
glad you went there because here's something I think that most of our viewers and listeners probably don't know. So when you and I do this show, we are interacting the night before on what the topic rundown is, and then literally 5 minutes before we go live,
that's it.
We're riffing. These guys are doing hours of meetings before they go on the air.
Right.
Everybody's takes are already known going in, right?
Hold on. Let me stop you. Not just that. I'll give you an example. Baseball tonight, we would have a 3. I used to hate the fact I had to be at Bristol at 3:30 for a 7:30, 8:30, 9:30 show. Because we would have a get together, which is exactly what they do. You have a get together, and the talent in the room says, "Hey, what do you want to talk about tonight?" Well, we're going to talk. And here's the thing: we were doing this during a live baseball season. They're not. Right. But we would say, I'm going to talk about A, B, and C. There is a full staff of people that then go out and pull all of the film and do all of the research and put all your notes together, to help you talk about the material you tell them.
To set you up to be successful. Yeah.
Right. And
so nobody in that entire team at ESPN said, hey, he's not much of a runner? Nobody? Nobody?
No. That, you know what happens? A lot of times you get a guy, people are too afraid to give their opinion because they're too afraid to step out. And that speaks volume. That's what ESPN is like that. But he should be, if I'm him, I would be pissed. I would be livid. If I was asked, hey, listen, I don't know this thing about basketball. Give me a rundown on this guy. You know, and I went out there and made an absolute fool of myself, which is exactly what he did. And then I don't know. I just can't stand people who don't have the guts to just say, you know what, I made a mistake. I really should have looked at this a little bit closer. I owe this a little bit more of my time. I wasn't paying. This guy is a thrower, a pure thrower, whatever. And you know what you and I would do? Oh, okay, let's move on.
Yeah, because listen, doing this on a national level now in sports and news, you know, I'm expected to know something about everything. I'm totally sympathetic with it. If you get something wrong, though, the doubling down thing, okay?
No, it's Lance Armstrong.
Yeah, it becomes that's when we start descending now into self-parody. Speaking of self-parody. I want to there's so much about Dabo Swinney I love. All right. But I got to drop come on, man. Okay. So over the weekend, I didn't offer any commentary. I want our audience to know. I just sent this link to Curt over the weekend. And I said, I didn't give my take on it at all. Just say, hey, I want you to just read this and tell me, are you buying it? And so there were 3 Clemson players that tested positive twice during random NCAA mandated testing before the bowl season, including one of their stars, Dexter Lawrence, that were therefore ruled ineligible for the rest of the year and didn't play in either of the 2 playoff games. And Clemson was adamant, our program's clean, yada yada yada. Well, now Dabo Swinney is claiming that they could have given their players this substance, Osteen, I believe is what it's called, which has been on a banned substance list for years. And this isn't creatine, okay? This is something that is part of a clear PED regimen. And as you and I have pointed out with this conversation before, you cannot casually do this. It's very dangerous to do it. You have to be coached. There are regimens you follow to do this for it to be successful. And he is claiming that it's possible that they could have mistakenly given this to their players through the program. Here's the thing. If that's true, Why isn't everybody on the team tested right now? Why haven't the strength and conditioning staff been held accountable? You mean to tell me if I'm a parent, you don't know what you're putting in my kid's body and you have no clue? What kind of a defense is that? Here's what my work in my day job has taught me. Whenever the bureaucratic body claims stupidity, offers it up as a defense, every time, guaranteed, true as gravity, as guaranteed as gravity exists, whenever the bureaucratic body offers stupidity up as its preemptive explanation, the truth is always worse. When they prefer stupidity as the preemptive explanation, the truth is always worse. But I'll throw it to you, Curt. From a guy in a sport riddled with PEDs, are you buying this?
I wish you had taken a picture of my response, my email response. I basically, for those that would like to know, and I'm not a fan of ha-has.
Yes.
I typed ha-ha, I think about 150
Yes, you
times,
did. Yeah.
in the reply, because it was that funny. I don't know if it's still the same, but maybe you can help me out. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, college football teams, for the most part, will eat together a lot of times.
Yep. It's training table. All of that is regimented, particularly at a program like Clemson. What these guys are putting into their bodies is regulated at these big-time schools constantly. Yes.
It is of paramount importance. And there's some time before this age when you start paying attention to everything you put in your body. What he took... So here's the thing to understand. I've researched this more than enough to know, because of all the things I went through and all the things I was accused of or heard of or talked about. But one of the things he got caught is on a pyramid, is on a regimen of performance enhancing drugs. It's not in and of itself a PED. It's part of a process by which you take PEDs. And much of the process is in place to amplify the short window of time that you're on them, or to mask all of the things you're doing while you're on them. None of these things is on and for itself by itself. It doesn't. There would be no reason for some of this stuff to be in your system other than this. And that's what you're saying. He got caught taking one of those drugs you just don't take.
Yeah, this is part of you mask the symptoms that you would externally show for being on PED use. That's what this substance does. Yes. This
is one of the drugs that keeps the druggies ahead of the drug testers. This is one of the this is why. Here's the other thing. This stuff is incredibly expensive. Somebody's footing the bill for multiple people at Clemson to do this. And come on.
Bond's basically a professional pharmacist, as you well know. Guy that went to jail for him, Curt. Yeah. What did he spend years in prison under contempt of court rather than testify? So can you imagine the amount of money he was getting paid by Bonds in order that sitting in a jail cell all of that time was preferable than to cutting a deal?
And some people, Greg Anderson, his whole life was ruined for the thought that maybe Barry would still be his best friend when he got out.
Right.
And I promise you that wasn't the case.
So now we're talking about a college program, because we talked about this before with Clemson. It was one star player and then a couple guys at the bottom of the depth chart here. So again, these guys aren't people, a star player, a couple guys at the bottom of the depth chart aren't going to go to one of the five best players on the team who's a first-round draft pick and say, hey, we got this guy. No. It's not going to work that way. So when you've got a guy at the top and the bottom and two guys at the bottom of the food chain, that's something going on systemic. Okay, that's not just a few guys that are out here. If you could have said, if it was a few of their guys that were all going to be high draft picks, they got with an agent, did something together, fine. But when we're at the top and bottom of the bell curve here, something systemic is going on. I can't believe this is not the. Can you imagine if Bill Belichick said, I think we might have given something, bad to our player. We would nothing else in sports would be happening on Sports Center tonight. I can't believe that there's not mandatory testing of everybody. I can't believe the strength and conditioning coach hasn't been fired. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, because there's no upside to them investigating this. None whatsoever. The NCAA and Clemson, there's none. And, I think this is one of the darker areas of sports. This is where, and I'm not including all of them, and I never do, but agents are involved here in a lot of ways. They have guys that are called runners that are not affiliated with an agency, but they work for that agent, and they go out there and they'll be the guys that'll take a player out and to a strip club, and there'll be problems, and they'll be like, well, listen, yeah, you know, we want you to sign with so and so, and if you don't sign with so and so, then the National Enquirer is going to find out about this story. Stuff like that stuff happens. Not as much anymore, but that stuff happens. And with this stuff, I mean, there are guys who I know, Steve, played in the big leagues only because they took PEDs. I don't have a shred of doubt that that's the same for the NFL, and maybe in a much more significant way.
The idea that you're with young men and you don't know what you're supposed to be putting in and putting in their bodies.
Let me just comment on that too, by the way. What they eat is literally on a schedule.
Yes.
How they eat it, because some of them they're trying to keep them skinnier than they are, and some of them they're trying to beef up. And a lot of these guys have personal regimens, personal coaches who are saying, listen, if you want to get to the first round, you need to be 310. You can't be 265.
Right.
And so they have to put muscle and mass on in very small windows, because you can't do it during the season when you're playing. So you have to do it in the off season, and you do it. Some guys do it in the wrong way.
We ran out of time. We'll get to this. Maybe it's providential, because maybe we'll get some news on the Bryce Harper front today. The Giants are expressing some interest. We'll get to that. Also tomorrow, the University of Georgia, apparently is the first confirmed racist university in American history and has cured its racism all in the span of 24 hours. So really an outstanding job by the administration at the University of Georgia. We will get to that tomorrow as well, right here on The Blaze. Until then, Curt, take care.
All right, bub.